Hello and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of those joining us today. Welcome to the Wilson Center's event, LGBTQ plus inclusion in the seats of power, how the incorporation of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer issues and community members makes for better diplomacy. My name is Alex Long, and I am a program associate with the Science and Technology Innovation Program, as well as the manager of the LGBTQI plus Employee Resource Group, or ERG, that was set up just last fall as a part of our Diversity and Inclusion Council here at the Wilson Center. To start us off and to give introductory remarks, I'd like to turn it over to Ambassador Mark Green, our new CEO and president of the Wilson Center. Ambassador.
Great, thanks, Alex. I am honored to be here with all of you to help celebrate Pride. You know, celebrating equality and diversity reminds us that the members of the human family each have unique skills, experiences, and life experiences. It's part of the magic of our existence, and also a great reservoir of wisdom and strength. Important events like this serve to remind us all of this, both how far we have come and all those times when we have fallen short. We have not always been an inclusive society. We are still far from being an inclusive society, but we have undeniably made progress, and that is something that every American should be rightly proud of. This is also the time to recommit ourselves to building a community that fosters diversity and inclusion, that respects people no matter who they are, where they come from, or who they love. Over the years, many people have battled and persevered, including our guest today. As we reflect on the progress that we have made here at home, today let's also acknowledge that there are many places around the world where being part of the LGBTQ plus community is still extremely dangerous. And that makes our work here at the Wilson Center much more important. We have a responsibility to use our platform to promote and to model inclusivity. Our ideas can cross borders, change minds, and shape policies. Every nation should embrace all of its citizens and harness their unique perspectives and skills. During my time at the U.S. Agency for International Development, we made sure that diversity was reflected in very real ways, not only in our workplace, but in the work that we do around the world. We supported many organizations in civil society who work tirelessly to protect and advocate on behalf of the LGBTQ plus community, especially during challenging times. At the Wilson Center, we also want to continue to support the community, and we'll look for ways to have these important conversations like today, not just during Pride Month, but throughout the year. I'd like to wrap up by thanking our panelists, Curtis Reed and Karine Jean-Pierre, who have been kind enough to join us today and to lend their voice to this important topic. And with that, Alex, I'm going to turn it back to you for this great program. Thank you for your work, and thanks to all who are tuned in today.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Green, for your opening remarks and your support, not only for the conversations that this Pride Month has inspired, but also for your commitment to equity at the Wilson Center. I really do appreciate it. And I'll be honest, moderating this panel with these two incredible guests on the topic of queerness and politics is an honor that I do not take lightly. I, like many, constantly try to understand my own story, and more recently, the narrative that brought me to moderating this discussion. I grew up in an era defined by cultural flashpoints such as the killing of Matthew Shepard, Prop 8, the fight for marriage equality, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and just the acceptance that being anti-gay for some was actually successful politics. My sexuality has always felt intensely controversial. During the years of President Obama's 2 terms, the nation progressed in the world of LGBTQI plus rights at almost a breakneck speed, a speed that fully swept me up on June 26, 2015, when Obergefell versus Hodges guaranteed all Americans the right to same-sex marriage. I wasn't even out at the time, but the day changed everything for me. Not because I had any marriage prospects at the time, but because I felt the halls of government, a place I had secretly always aspired to be a part of, wasn't really out of reach any longer. But the right to marriage and the other advancements that we have seen over the past decade do not solve the issues of LGBTQI plus inclusion that queer people still grapple with today. Because of the political and unfortunately partisan nature of the fight for civil rights for gender and sexual minorities, navigating domestic and foreign policy spaces comes with so much unknown, not only with how you will be treated, but also the unconscious biases colleagues hold, which is only heightened for those who inhabit multiple identities, like people of color, transgendered folk, and those with disabilities. We still have so far to go as a nation and a world where people can still lose their jobs, their houses, their families, and their lives for being a part of a vast community encapsulated by the letters like LGBTQ and I. It was Audre Lorde, the queer civil rights leader and poet, who said, "When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed, but when we are silent, we are still afraid, so it is better to speak." And it is for that reason that we are speaking today. Curtis L. Reed and Karine Jean-Pierre are examples of queer excellence in government and a reminder of how far we've come, that they are able to discuss these issues on this proverbial stage, but also how far we have yet to go because of how necessary this conversation still is to have. As for a quick run of show for our audience, I will introduce our guest with a short bio provided to me, and then they will go into their prepared opening remarks. Then we will open up the discussion with a few questions from me and from the audience. Please use the hashtag #PrideAtWilson to send your questions in, or email stip@wilsoncenter.org. That's STIP@wilsoncenter.org with your questions, and I'll be fielding those. Thank you to Sarah Matthews, who's manning the Twitter. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our friends at Out and National Security, the Science and Technology Innovation Program, the External Relations Department at the Wilson Center, the AV team, and of course the D&I Council for their support, as well as Jesse Shaw and Amanda Finney for being so helpful along the way. So first, I will introduce our esteemed guest, Curtis Reed. Curtis Reed is a member of the U.S. Foreign Service since 2003. Curtis served previously at the White House from 2016 to 17 as Senior Advisor to National Security Advisor Susan Rice. Prior to that, he was the Director for Multilateral Affairs at the National Security Council, where he coordinated U.S. government engagement with the United Nations. From 2010 to 2015, Curtis was a political advisor and later a political counselor at the U.S. mission to the UN, where he was primarily responsible for the Security Council's work related to the Middle East. Curtis served most recently as Deputy Political Counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Israel from 2018 to 2021. His other overseas assignments include tours in Algeria, Indonesia, Iraq, Timor Leste, and the United Kingdom. Curtis earned a BA from the George Washington University and an MA from the Institut d'études politiques in Paris. Curtis, why don't you take it away first?
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you for putting this event together today. And thank you very much, Ambassador Green, for your welcoming remarks and for hosting us today. I think something that both of you touched on is an important point. The fact that a prominent think tank like the Wilson Center now views it as kind of a normal event to host one of these panels during Pride Month is in itself a sign of progress. I remember when I joined the Foreign Service nearly 20 years ago, these kind of events were often only organized by LGBTQI plus employees themselves, and often with little support from the institutions that they worked in. So thank you very much for bringing us together. I want to really look forward to your questions today, but I want to touch on two key themes in some opening comments. The first, I want to discuss the impact of diversity in decision-making in foreign policy. And the second, given that, as Alex mentioned, I'm a career Foreign Service officer, I want to touch on the work that remains to be done to increase diversity in foreign affairs agencies in the US government. For the first topic, the importance of diversity and representation in decision-making in foreign policy, I think it's useful to give you a sense of how we make foreign policy decisions in government. Certainly, there are discussions and debates that go on in offices across Washington, throughout the government, and embassies around the world that make significant decisions daily. But the most consequential decisions related to our national security are made in a group of windowless rooms here at the White House, where we bring together relevant participants from various federal departments and agencies every day. Just some recent examples of the kind of things we discuss include the famine in Ethiopia, issues facing women and girls in Afghanistan, how to respond to Uganda's proposed legislation, which would further criminalize consensual same-sex relations, and next steps in addressing the coup in Burma. Now, I don't need to tell you all that for most of our history, such meetings were almost exclusively reserved for straight white men. And even as recently as the beginning of the Obama administration, seeing women in senior positions in national security was relatively rare. I'm proud to say that at the start of this new administration, more than ever before, my fellow senior directors at the National Security Council reflect the diversity of the country we serve. We still have further to go, but I think this is a welcome sign of progress. And I think it's important to identify why diversity matters in terms of decision-making. Obviously, it matters because representation matters. How could we have a meeting about women and girls in Afghanistan with no women in the room? How could we talk about anti-same-sex legislation in Uganda with no LGBTQI plus people in the room? Representation matters because we represent the various communities that we're discussing around the world. But diversity also fosters creativity. And when we sit together in those rooms with no windows, thinking about the options to end a famine, to address a human rights crisis, or to bring about a ceasefire, the more diverse the lived experiences of the people in the room are, the greater the range of creative ideas that will be proposed. And I'm fortunate that all of my colleagues are brilliant. I think the American people should feel proud of both the career and non-career employees that come to work every day to defend the United States' interests around the globe. But if we all came from the same background or we went to the same universities, as used to be the case, we would all think alike. And there's an old joke that the Foreign Service used to be pale, male, and Yale. And that certainly rang true from a cultural perspective. But what was actually more pernicious about that attribution is the groupthink that occurs in decision-making. And of course, groupthink is impenetrable when no one in the group has an outside perspective or critique. And I think that we can all agree that some of our biggest foreign policy blunders are likely directly traced to this phenomenon. The life experiences of LGBTQI plus individuals often mean that we see the world through a different lens. We might have a different relationship with government or with the formal societal power structures that we live in than our straight friends and colleagues do. We might be more willing to suggest a policy option that seems radical, often because many times in our own life, we've had to make bold and brave choices. Nearly every day I witness firsthand how diversity makes a positive impact in terms of policy outcomes. And I think this is true whether it's a meeting that's chaired by the president or a meeting among more junior officials that are exploring various policy options. I think that we can all collectively agree that diversity makes our foreign policy more successful. But while the greater diversity among the ranks of White House staff is a clear marker of progress, there is still more for us to strive from as an LGBTQI plus community. I don't have the statistics to share here officially, but I think that it's safe to say that our community remains underrepresented within national security positions compared to the percentage of the population that we represent. And it is not lost on me that I am a white cisgender gay man from a privileged background who face none of the challenges that transgender individuals or people of color from our community experience in pursuing their own career goals. So it's particularly important to me to use this opportunity to make sure that a path exists, hopefully for a broader spectrum of younger LGBTQI plus individuals looking to pursue similar career paths. And just to touch on kind of my own career for a second, like I said at the beginning, while I'm currently fortunate to be a member of the White House team, I'm on loan from the State Department. And I just want to mention some of the progress we've made and some of the challenges that we remain in terms of the diversity in the Foreign Service. LGBTQI plus individuals are certainly not new to diplomacy. I'd say that two centuries ago, prominent families often dealt with their gay son by seeking a diplomatic posting far from home for him. But I would say that during my own career, I have seen LGBTQI plus individuals go from surviving to thriving. And while I was not confronted with the possibility of losing my security my security clearance like LGBTQI plus diplomats were as recently as the 1990s. When I joined in 2003, there was still no way to bring same-sex partners with us on overseas assignments, or back to DC if your partner was a foreign national. And as many have cited, the State Department would ship your pet to post, but not your partner. It took until 2009 for the government to recognize same-sex partners of diplomats, and provide equal services like access to embassy medical facilities. It was even more recently that a more accepting culture has taken hold in the department, and we are able to serve openly and safely with our families by our side. While we've made great strides, a career in diplomacy still poses unique challenges. If any of you consider the Foreign Service, and I hope many of you will be asked to serve in places where adult consensual same-sex relations are still criminalized, or where our community is still forced to exist in the shadows. Living and serving openly overseas, even in the most homophobic places, can be an inspiring example to local queer people, and also a powerful example of our own American values. But I will not hide that being an LGBTQI+ diplomat still leads to unique hardships that our straight colleagues don't face. The State Department, under Secretary Blinken's leadership, is working hard to make the Foreign Service more welcoming and diverse, both for LGBTQI+ individuals and for other minority groups. And I hope that the high-level dedication to these goals, as well as the focus on them by organizations like the Wilson Center, will help make the Foreign Service a real option for many of the talented LGBTQI+ people who are joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Alex to introduce my colleague, Karine Jean-Pierre.
Thank you so much, Curtis, and thank you. And I cannot wait to dive more into that later. Now, Karine, welcome.
Thanks.
Karine Jean-Pierre currently serves as the White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary. She was the Senior Advisor to President-elect Joe Biden and Chief of Staff to Vice President-elect Kamala Harris on the Biden-Harris campaign. Prior to her role on the campaign, she served as Chief Public Affairs Officer for MoveOn.org and an NBC and MSNBC political analyst. Jean-Pierre served as a regional political director for the White House Office of Political Affairs during the Obama-Biden administration and as Deputy Battleground States Director for President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. She served as the Southeast Regional Political Director for President Obama's 2008 campaign, Deputy Campaign Manager for Martin O'Malley for President, Campaign Manager for the ACLU's Reproductive Freedom Initiative, and Deputy Chief of Staff and Director of Legislative and Budget Affairs for 2 members in the New York City Council. Previously, she worked at the Center for Community and Corporate Ethics, pushing major companies to change their business practices. Born in Martinique and raised in New York, Jean-Pierre is a graduate of Columbia University. Karine, welcome.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you for that warm welcome. I want to also thank Ambassador Mark Green. I also want to thank Curtis, my wonderful colleague, for just really just wonderful, great opening. And it was really, sometimes you don't realize what people are going through, and seeing, and even in your career as in the foreign space. Wow, it's just amazing to hear, and how far we've come. So thank you for sharing that. I am incredibly honored to be sitting here, to be working in this White House, a historic administration in so many ways. And as we're talking about representation and visibility, the importance of those two things, and you see that with me sitting here, you see it with my colleague Curtis sitting here, how important it is to have that representation. So I'm excited about this conversation, because having LGBTQI+ representation, it does matter. It does make a difference. It does make diplomacy better. So thank you so much to the Wilson Center for having us both here to have this discussion. And like I said, it's an honor to be here. The president, the Biden-Harris administration has been very, very laser focused on making sure that equity is at the center of everything that we do, and also that there's representation. And this is the most diverse administration ever. And that is something, to be proud of. Now, we do have a lot more work to do. And we always have to make sure that we keep up the work that needs to continue to be done. But we also have to celebrate the diversity that we see in this administration that we have never seen in any other administration. And I think about my good friend, we call him Secretary Mayor Pete, who has made history himself. You think about Dr. Levine, and it goes on and on and on. And so to all of you who are listening and watching and trying to figure out what's next and are very much interested in the subjects that we're talking about, whether it's foreign policy or working in the White House itself, doing domestic policy. Thank you as well for being here. And I just want to tell you a little bit about myself, and I know we'll probably dive into that more as we continue to have this conversation. I am a Black immigrant, queer, woman, and I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and Queens, New York. And when I came out to my parents at 16, my mom, my immigrant mother, who grew up in Haiti, who I love dearly, she didn't accept it. And I ended up going back in the closet. Now, I'm much older than many of you who are watching, so it was a little bit of a different time. And so when that happened, I went back into the closet, and it took me a really long time to come back out. And I say this to say is that it is a journey. And I know that we are proudly sitting here and telling our stories and having this conversation. I know some folks are still having a difficult time. And so just know that, we see you, we appreciate you. We will continue to lift you up and celebrate you. And, I hope that in telling my story, it helps so many others out there. And I know one thing that I hear all the time is how people see me in this position, how much it helps them. So, this is something, that I am thankful to this president, because one of the reasons why I stood behind the podium recently and made history, being able to do the press briefing and address the press, it was because this president understood how important representation is. He understood how important visibility is. And so, I will continue to do my job the best that I can, and we will continue to do our work here as an administration to push forward and make sure that we have continue to have inclusion, and we have the voices, that diverse voices at the table to move an agenda forward, to move this president's agenda forward. So thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, of course, and thank you both for the amazing introductions. And now we can, gone with the formal parts, and now it's time for the discussion. Again, if you want to join in on Twitter, it's #PrideAtWilson, or email at stip, STIP, @wilsoncenter.org. But I'll start the discussion. So, you both are individuals with truly incredible careers behind you and in front of you, as the audience has seen. And our audience today, I got a peek at the RSVPs, and it is a fair amount of university students, a fair amount of policy professionals who have been in the service for 50 years. So it really runs the gamut. And I feel, though, as a young professional myself, I feel like, and I mentioned this earlier, I entered the world of politics almost in spite of them, watching pundits on television, demonizing who I was as a person very early on. But I was interested, and Karine, we can start with you, and then Curtis, what brought you to overcome the rhetoric of the time when you initially entered the political spaces that you both inhabit, and why you made the choice to go down your career paths, even despite this?
It's such a great question, Alex. Recently, I did an interview, and I was asked, what would you tell the younger version of yourself, right? Little Karine, when you were trying to figure out who you were and coming out, and all those difficult things that you have to think through, and so many people in our community. And one of the things that I thought that I would tell myself was that keep dreaming, keep dreaming. You will get there. People will support you. People do love you. And I tell the story about my mom. When I was 16, I came out, and she didn't take it very well. Actually, it went horribly wrong. And you fast forward decades later, and I have a partner. I have a 7-year-old daughter. My mom could not be more proud of me. She could not be more proud of her daughter, and she could not, love her grandchild and my partner more. And so it's a journey. I tell everyone it's a journey, and it's easy to say, believe in yourself and keep dreaming, but that is a really big part of it. It truly is. And make sure you just have the right people around you. Make sure you have that core group of people that's going to lift you up when you're down, that's going to tell you, you know what, you deserve to be here. You are the smartest person in the room, or you're the person that's going to get that job, or you're going to do just fine in that job. And so that has helped me tremendously. But it is a tough one. It was actually a very difficult question to answer, because it's not that easy. it's like perseverance and having family and people who love you and believing in yourself is truly the best answer that I can share.
And that's a great one. Curtis?
Thanks. No, I think Karine really said it beautifully. I mean, I think one of the examples or one of the issues was that 20 years ago, there were very few examples of out LGBTQI plus people in these roles. And so I remember when I, first started university here in Washington, DC, I wanted to study foreign policy. You kind of didn't know if you could be both openly gay and be a diplomat because I just didn't know many people that were. And so I hope events like this help connect, if it's not Karine and I, with other people that can be examples to you all to discuss these possible career paths with. But it was really that. I think at the time there were kind of stereotypes about the kind of professions that LGBTQI plus people were meant to pursue, and diplomacy wasn't one of them. It is not, perhaps, it's kind of a staid environment in many ways. And so I just wasn't sure how I would fit in as an openly gay man. And I remember even debating in my first days of the Foreign Service, should I come out to people at work? And I did, because I think these careers can be quite taxing, and they can also kind of involve a lot of yourself, your personal life, directly in your career in ways that other professions might not. And so I decided I couldn't separate the two and that I was going to be openly gay at work. And I found that if you're good at your job and you're a genuine person, you will succeed if you're doing what you're really passionate about. Now, of course, you have to have people that are supportive of you. And so I think particularly early on, when it wasn't quite as open of an environment, you sort of sought those mentors out, those people that would help you, find your way in the career. But I think that, if you do those things, you do what you're passionate about and you do them openly and kind of with your full self engaged, that you'll be successful.
And so you bring up a really good point about the role of mentors in a lot of queer professionals' lives. And I was wondering if either of you had any stories of where I feel like people either enter the professional space and they get a queer mentor, or they entered a professional space, there was none, so then they became one, and for other people down the line. So I was wondering if either of you had any experiences where a queer mentor helped you get to where you are today.
Gosh, I wish I did. I do not, I can't speak to a particular queer mentor that helped me get here along the way. I had a lot of allies, because even though I tell the story about coming out when I was 16 and going back into the closet, and it taking some time, I've been out practically my entire adult life. And I've had wonderful people around me, wonderful allies who lifted me up, but there is not a one queer mentor that I can focus on. And I think it speaks to what Curtis was saying. 20 years ago, there weren't that many people that you can point to. And my hope, and I'm sure his hope is as well, is that we can be mentors to so many, even some folks who are watching, to so many people who want to be where we are, or who are thinking about it or not quite sure. And I'm very happy to do that.
Yeah, I don't have one specific example, but I was very fortunate to discover early on at the State Department that there is an LGBT affinity group. And, early on in the orientation program, they invited me to a lunch meeting, and I met a bunch of other queer Foreign Service officers. And then that kind of, led me to build a network. And I think now in the State Department or elsewhere in government, you might have more formal structures where when you're going overseas, you're trying to figure out where might be, a place that's safe to take my partner. And in those days, it was a bit more informal. So creating that kind of network early on helped me kind of navigate where in the world I might be most successful or feel most comfortable. And I think thankfully those things have become more formalized, and I think there are formal mentoring programs now. But as Karine said, I hope that we can help fulfill that role as well.
Yeah, and then bouncing off that, Curtis, I mean, you're a gay man in the Foreign Service, which can be seen as quite brave considering, different countries' government's views on who you are as a person. Did that have an impact on the way you worked in these situations, or a motivation that you had to carry out the job, or to feel like you had to overperform? I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'll let you describe.
Yeah, I think because when you're a diplomat living overseas, it's both your professional life and your personal life. I think that many of you all, if you choose to enter these careers, will be surprised to find the power that comes with the fact that you are the official representative of the United States. So you're going to visit a government official in a province somewhere in a deeply conservative country. Same-sex relations may be outlawed in that country. They have to listen to you because you represent the United States. And that in itself is an empowering experience, I feel. But secondly, you find LGBTQI plus people everywhere. And often in places that are more conservative, you find communities that try to reach out to you and make contact with you, maybe more than they would in a really liberal open place, because they're looking to make contact with a similar person with similar identity, but from the United States. And I will say that in every place I've been to, whether it was meeting gay men in Iraq who were being persecuted by militias, to in East Timor, meeting a very small group of LGBT individuals there in what a small new country. I've been able to make those kind of connections, and that's been a very rewarding experience as well.
And Karine, you mentioned this earlier about how, congratulations, you made history a couple of weeks ago as the first openly gay person and first Black woman in, I think, 30 years or so to lead a formal White House press briefing. And the historically intersectional nature of that headline definitely made waves. And I want to ask you about how your Blackness and your queerness intersects and how that has also influenced your time in DC. But then I could also imagine that you may get questions like this a fair amount about being the first of doing these types of things and how it feels to always be held up as the first and the pressures that might have, incumbent on themselves.
Yeah, I guess I am very lucky to have had a few of those milestones, firsts and seconds and what have you. And yeah, I'm honored. It is truly, I guess, an honor to think through that. It's so funny, that day I'm still kind of processing. I probably will be processing it for many decades, even as hopefully, if I'm lucky, tell my grandchildren about that day. And it's so interesting because the last several years, especially under the last administration, all of those things that you listed out, it was used as an attack, right? Being Black was used as an attack. Being a woman was used as an attack. Being gay was used as being an immigrant. So it was kind of mind blowing or very real, in a real way, to be seen as something, everything that you are, being hated or being put into display as something to point out and say, okay, all of these things are terrible and are bad. And so that was happening, right, the last 4 years, as many of us, I'm sure, can speak to and can understand, surely. And so it took, it was like almost a realization, or another kind of those big moments where you're like, wow, I am seen as less than, and how do I get to the other side of this? And so for me, what I ended up doing, and I think I've done this really throughout my career, which is I let it empower me. Being that diversity is actually powerful, being, an immigrant, a LGBTQ, part of the LGBTQ plus community, being a woman, being Black, all of those things are actually empowering. And so I use that to my benefit. I use that in a way to kind of speak my truth. And, I can't hide from all of those things, right? Those are things that I truly am. And so why don't I just speak it to power? And so, it's definitely the intersectionality of all of those things that we just listed out. But it is, I see it as empowering. I see it as a way to speak up for people, right? To use my platform to make sure I'm not leaving anyone behind. To make sure that when I'm telling my story, I know I'm telling the stories of so many people. And so that is, I believe, what I think people see, when I'm standing behind that podium, and what people feel. And then the other part for me, though, which is I am just trying to do my job, right? I'm trying to do my job as truthfully, as honestly as I can do it. Curtis said something that was very true, which is we are representing the country. I am representing the President of the United States when I speak on behalf of him, right? When I'm in that briefing room. And so in many ways, it's not about me, it's about the job that we're doing, and it's about representing the American people. But when people see it, the visual, component of it, it is very powerful, and you can't deny that for folks. And so again, representation matters, and visibility is so important.
I agree. And that's why we're doing this right now. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. Curtis, when you were in the Foreign Service and working in all of these different situations, you mentioned in your opening remarks how bringing in diverse voices, and then specifically for this conversation, queer voices, makes better policy and makes a richer text that you can then work from. And I was wondering if you had any examples of how either your place in the LGBTQI plus community or a colleague of yours added to policy and made it more robust and made it a better diplomacy.
I think I would just draw out a little bit on something I referenced in terms of the relationship that that LGBTQI plus people have with either the government, with formal kind of societal power structures. If you grow up in some kind of a minority community, you often feel like you were on the outside of that formal power structure, or you were somehow fighting against it or trying to be yourself despite it. And I think that I've seen multiple of my queer colleagues be very thoughtful in terms of using empathy as a tool and being able to put themselves in the position of a minority community in X country, or a rebel group in X country, or some other disenfranchised group, because in some form, even though it's not going to be the same exact facts on the ground, you've had a similar experience in your own life. And so I think you might be less kind of inclined to side with kind of the prevailing view of the majority group or of the government in X country, and kind of try to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I think I've seen a number of my LGBTQI plus colleagues use that empathy to great effect.
And this is a question for both of you. I mean, deciding to be out at work is a big deal in a lot of ways. I know we at the Wilson Center, we have our LGBTQI plus ERG, and we have a public and we have a private group. And the private group is for people who don't yet feel comfortable being out at work. And so we can talk, and then the concerns that are brought up there can then be brought to the larger group, which is full of our straight allies, and then disseminated throughout the rest of the Wilson Center. So that still kind of inhabits. And I think that a lot of people like to think that marriage equality is kind of the big check mark, and then everything after that, you guys are good. But of course, the acronym LGBTQI plus inhabits so many different communities. So I was wondering where you both feel the next big steps need to be made within the queer liberation movement, and where we're moving as a society, and where you see that everything trending.
Okay. So I think this goes into a little bit of what I was saying at the top, which is, we've come a long way. We see a lot of diversity. I think I mentioned this being the most diverse administration ever in any presidential administration, which is a great, wonderful thing. But we understand, the president understands, the vice president understands that there's so much more work to be done. And I think one of the things, though, that we are doing, which is, I don't think I've ever seen it done before, is putting equity at the center of everything, making sure that we don't leave communities behind, because communities have been left behind. And yes, marriage, we have marriage, and that's wonderful. And I think that is we should certainly be proud of that. But there's housing, there's healthcare, right? There is so many education. There's so many things that what we're seeing now in states on how transgender students, transgender community just across the board are being kind of harmed in so many ways. And so there's still a lot of work to be done. And the president understands that, we all understand that, and we'll continue to do that work. You know, you think about the Equality Act, where that is something that, you know, the president has said once, you know, when it gets passed, he has urged Congress to pass it, and he will sign that into law once it passed. So we have to continue to work towards things like that, very critical, important legislation like that one. And so there's a lot of work to be done. There truly is. And as you said, Alex, you know, the LGBTQI plus, that encompasses a large swath of folks in our community, and we cannot leave anybody behind. We got to keep fighting for everyone.
Yeah, I would completely agree with what Karine said. I think a lot of, you know, in my field, a lot of the instances of open LGBTQI plus people were white gay men. And we have a long way to go in terms of having more. And I think that the national security space is particularly behind in terms of diversity. We don't have this problem as much in our federal workforce more broadly. But there is something about, and there's a lot of work going on into this about why the national security sphere is less diverse. And so we, you know, dramatic underrepresentation of transgender individuals, of LGBTQI plus people of color, people of color of any kind in the Foreign Service remain underrepresented. So I think it's really about building out who is included in this diversity and making sure that recruitment and retention across the government really brings in everyone, so that, you know, the people that came first, you know, are not the only ones that are representative of the community and the government.
And I think that to follow up on that, though, it might be generally the same kind of answer. I mean, we've all had, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that we've all had just such a trying year as a populace. And
Yeah.
I mean, not only through the pandemic, but then also through the murder of George Floyd, and then what then ensued through May and June, and just such a kind of about face of realizing the importance of organizations and the importance of identity and the importance of these conversations. So I'm wondering if anything from the past year and just the amount of self-reflection that we've all had to like take on has changed your perspective on any of these issues, or changed the way that you try to advocate for these things.
That's a good question. I mean, so we came into this administration saying that we were dealing with multiple crises, right? We were dealing with economic crises, we were dealing with a pandemic, we were dealing with climate change crisis, and, you know, racial equity, having to truly deal with an issue that's been around for, when I'm thinking about racial equity here, that's been around from the beginning, right, of one of the original sin of this country. And George Floyd certainly opened many people's eyes. And you think about COVID, the pandemic, it really showed the, you know, the disparities that we see that's been around for generations and generations. So it's been, to your point, an eye-opening year on so many fronts, on so many levels. And that's why we have to act, right? We have to act, and we cannot do nothing. We cannot have inaction because there's too much at stake for so many people. And so, I think I have to tell you, it's such a good question. I think it's been good to see on the racial equity component, the conversations that we have been hearing, even though for many people in the Black community have been like, or the brown community or people of color have been like, yeah, well, we've been dealing with that for a long time. And it's been difficult having to have those conversations even now because they're at such a high level now. And again, there's so much at stake because of all of these multiple crises that we're seeing. And the pandemic, the pandemic has devastated so many people's lives, and we're still trying to get back to normal. So, I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing. I know that there is more work to be done, right? Once again, a lot more work to be done. So I'm just glad that I am part of helping to help fix the problem, right? And being part of this government, being part of this administration. And that's what we're going to continue to do and continue to work towards.
I think one of the really welcome things that we've seen was the breaking down of barriers between different minority groups and different minority groups supporting each other. You know, the queer community supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that's been, I think people had a tendency to kind of be siloed. And I think somehow everyone kind of took a bit of a pause over the past year and thought about how these various movements can be combined. My friends tease me that I'm becoming Madeleine Albright with my brooches at work, but I'm wearing this progress pin because I think it's important that it combines the rainbow flag with the trans flag with the Black Lives Matter colors, because I think that these struggles all do intersect, and that we all, every minority group has an important role in supporting others.
Yeah, I think that's so right, because it's been multicultural, multi-generational, and that's what you've seen this past year, which that has not been the case, where people are just from all, from all sides are coming together to have, to help each other out, which is pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, and I think even just yesterday, Secretary Blinken announcing that they were going to raise the progress flag at the State Department, which is just so great to see and so welcome. We have a couple of questions from the audience, and I would say that the largest type of question that we have so far has to deal with, I mean, we are a foreign policy institution. So what is the general, what is the US's presence in the foreign policy space in forwarding LGBTQI plus rights? And what do we have to say to LGBTQI plus individuals in places that might not be so welcoming to these people?
It's a really good question, Alex, and I think it's actually one that would probably merit its own panel at some point. This is something, a lot of good work went into this in the Obama administration. I was the director at the NSC that was in charge of coordinating our LGBT policy in the foreign policy arena. And it's always a question as to kind of what you should put as your baseline goals. A lot of work has been done in terms of decriminalizing homosexuality around the world. That I think we can all agree that's kind of a baseline goal. We're trying to do a lot of work to help LGBT refugees that are particularly vulnerable in refugee communities around the world. But I think it's always kind of a balancing act. If we push marriage equality as our foreign policy, is that going to backfire on us in some places in the world? So I think a lot of the work that's been done has been to try to underscore that LGBT rights are fundamental human rights, and that they should never be criminalized. People should be allowed to live securely and openly and freely. And then I think how far you take it is part of a very lively debate that we have here frequently, and that we welcome input from groups like the Wilson Center on. I will say one thing that has been really rewarding is, over my 20 years in the Foreign Service, often it used to be LGBTQI plus and Foreign Service officers who were themselves pushing these things overseas. If there was that part of the Human Rights Report to write, Curtis is gay, he'd be good at writing that part of the Human Rights Report. And now it is just completely, taken for granted that all of my straight colleagues push these policy priorities as well. And I think that's been, people say that it's a sign of progress when people that are not in your minority group also advocate for your rights. And I think that's been a really welcome sign of progress that I've seen.
Yeah, we had an event last Thursday with the writer Alexander Chi, and he was talking about how he was being asked to create syllabi for universities that just focused on queer literature or Korean American literature, while that's not necessarily like what he focuses on or what he spent his life doing, but because you inhabit this identity. And Curtis, you even mentioned this before the panel about how you don't have the full queer portfolio because it is just so kind of like dispersed, which is a really great thing to hear. I have another question from the audience. So let me just see. So how do you think we can welcome more non-binary and or gender non-conforming people into US government positions, especially diplomatic positions? Do you feel there's a lack of non-binary or gender non-conforming people in these types of positions?
Like I said at the beginning, I think, diplomacy is a very old profession. It often can be a little bit staid. It's probably the only profession I can think of where you get, sent overseas, and there's always still a spouses club that has monthly lunches, and LGBTQI plus spouses might be welcome in those lunches now, but there's still kind of this traditional way of life. And I think I've really seen some of the younger generation of foreign service officers breaking that down a bit. People who are not, their partner might live with them part of the time that they're overseas, but they work somewhere else, or they just kind of don't want to engage in the kind of the traditional mold. So I think you have to do, both things. I think there's always the kind of official part where you have to be part of whatever, official events and structures exist for the diplomatic community, but you also can do your part to change it and to engage in different ways and host different kinds of events that then open other people's eyes who might not have, had any exposure to your community before. I think that if there are specific examples of things that we can do to make the Foreign Service or other national security professions more welcoming to non-binary or non-gender conforming individuals, I think we welcome those. There's a process underway to look at what specific policy changes. Often it's things like, a gender being assigned on your badge at work, or on your orders to travel overseas, or that gives you some kind of an issue with a host government when you're applying for a visa, that kind of thing. A lot of those things are things that we can work through internal rules in the various agencies. But it's, like I said, I won't hide that it can be a conservative environment, but I think that we also can play a very important educational role.
Karine, your CV boasts so many different campaign positions and positions in just very public politics. And now as Deputy Press Secretary, one of the most public people. And I'm wondering how, you've worked for many Democrats who at one point in time did not support marriage equality, as you were an out person with a partner. And I'm wondering how you squared that with like getting through like the day-to-day, or not the day-to-day like it was always plaguing you, but how it worked for you.
It's such a, that I was actually thinking about that recently when I started in my political career, and it was just a different time. To be quite honest, it was a different time. It wasn't just that the person I was working for did not support. It was almost everyone, right? The Democratic Party has changed. It has changed over the last couple of decades, and so and I remember even, picking a presidential candidate, back in 2007 for the 2008 primary. And I remember looking at where everyone was on when it came to LGBTQ issues, and everyone was pretty much at the same place. There wasn't much. At least the mainstream folks. There were some folks who were very supportive, but the mainstream folks, they were pretty much where the party was at the time. And you do think about that. You do think about, because I was out, and you do think about, okay, how am I going to be perceived? How am I going to be treated? And there was never an issue, right? I think what it was as well is that it's almost like the country had to change so that the party can change. And so that's what you ended up seeing. I was thinking about, when the Supreme Court ruled on same-sex marriage back in 2015. I was here at the White House, not working at the White House, but I was invited that night to see the colors of the White House change. And at the time, my daughter was about 13 months old, and she was not quite walking yet. It was the same week where we had a Pride event here at the White House. And we went to that, and then we came back for the celebration from the Supreme Court ruling. And I remember holding her up and watching the White House turn into Pride colors, and thinking, wow, look how much has changed from 2007 to 2015. And it was just a special moment, and being there with my then 13-month-old. And so, that's just the way it is. Things have changed, but it wasn't back then. I didn't have many choices, sadly.
And Curtis, so Karine, you just brought up the when marriage equality was made the law of the land. And Chris, I'm wondering if there's any similar defining moments in your time and your political career that is kind of like a source of joy for the progress that we've made as a nation in LGBTQI plus policies.
Mine is maybe kind of funny because it might not have been as impactful to some people as it was to me, but it was kind of, the last quarter of the Obama administration. I was working for then National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and in the position I had, I kind of saw every memo, be it foreign or domestic, that came across the president's desk because it would go by her, and so I get a chance to look at it first. And it was just before the 2016 election, and it was a memo to make Stonewall Inn a LGBTQI memorial in New York. And I remember I just kind of paused and put it down and looked out the window for a minute, and I thought, wow, how far we've come. That, just 10 years before, like Karine had said, there wasn't even kind of clear support for marriage equality from all the candidates on the Democratic side. And here we were, it was kind of like someone was going through a list of every positive thing they could do in this space. And I kind of remember that. And then when the memorial was actually dedicated, I thought, wow, we actually have a national monument to this now. So that kind of represented a leap forward to me.
Yeah, that's huge. And I hate to say that we only have 3 minutes, and thank you so much for both being here. I want to end on one last thing, and this gets brought up a lot as the manager of the ERG from my straight colleagues. And I was wondering if you could give any advice or anything that you wish that your straight colleagues would know on, how to be an ally, which might be a term that is overused, but in this case, we'll use it to support your queer coworkers and to make a more inclusive environment. If you have any advice for that. Karine, we'll start with you and then Curtis.
Wow. Gosh, I think I would say that, I'm not that different from you, right? I have a family, I have a child, I have a partner. I am here for the same reason, right? To try to do a job on behalf of this administration, on behalf of the American people. And, I want to be treated the same. And I think it's really important. And I think that gets lost sometimes. I think, you get put into a box or get treated in a certain way because you're seen, oh, you're LGBTQI, so things are different from you, and we maybe we can't quite relate, but so I think that's what I would say. It's there are things that are incredibly similar to things that we're trying to do in life, and I think in many ways, I think for me, because I am a mom, I have a child just like they do, right? We're all trying to figure out how to get through life, especially in the pandemic now. It's like all of us are trying to figure out how do we manage our child, what do we do with school? And so there are more that bring us together than that separate us. And so I think that would be the message.
Yeah, I think this is really an area where, I've always been really lucky to have amazing straight allies in my life. But I think what Karine said is really true. I think it's become more just kind of normal. A lot of my colleagues are always interested in, if it's Pride Month, if there's something they can do to be supportive. If I'm serving at an embassy overseas, they'll offer to come, join the rest of the embassy team to go march in the local Pride parade or whatnot. But also, I think, marriage equality, the fact that a lot of people in our community have kids these days, it just meant that we're kind of, other people with the same kind of life issues as many of our straight colleagues. And so I think at the same time, while we've seen kind of more allies be more open, I think the differences have become less over time as well.
Well, I think that is truly the perfect way to end this event. Karine and Curtis, I'm so honored that you chose to come here and speak with me today. And I know that this conversation was just so fruitful for so many people. And I really can't express my appreciation enough. Thank you for coming to the Wilson Center. And hopefully one day we'll be able to do this in person.
Yes.
And maybe not even just during June, because this is important programming every month of the year. And thank you everyone at home. Thanks to our audience, to the whole Wilson Center team, and everyone who helped support me and make this event actually happen. You're all the best, and have a great, great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.